أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها المزمل قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه وانقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا إنا سنلقي عليك قولا ثقيلا إن ناشئة الليل هي أشد وطئا وأقوم قيلا إن لك في النهار سبحا طويلا واذكر اسم ربك وتبتل إليه تبتيلا. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, O thou who art bearing a heavy responsibility, stand up in prayer at night, except a small portion thereof, half of it, or make it a little less than that, or make it a little more than that, and recite the Quran slowly and thoughtfully. Verily, we are charging thee with a weighty word. Verily, getting up at night is the most potent means of subduing the self and most effective in respect of words of prayer. Thou hast indeed during the day a long chain of engagements. So remember the name of thy Lord and devote thyself to Him with full devotion. These are the verses, the first 9 verses of Surah Al-Muzammil, chapter number 73 of the Holy Quran, which was revealed in the earlier part of Holy Prophet ﷺ's ministry. Have you ever wondered what a day in the life of Holy Prophet ﷺ must have looked like? A day usually has 24 hours. The day can be divided in 2 parts, day and night. Wonder for a second, visualize what a day of the Holy Prophet ﷺ would have been like. The span of 24 hours. In today's program, in today's Jalsa Sirat al-Nabi, what I intend to paint before you is the picture of Holy Prophet ﷺ's night. And to be precise, only 5 hours of it. So, at this Jalsa, from a day in the life of Holy Prophet ﷺ, I am going to share only 5 hours of his day. Beginning with his Tahajjud Salah. When we go through the books of Ahadith and Sirah, we find out that Holy Prophet ﷺ would sleep right after offering his Isha Salah. Nowadays here in our area in Masjid Mubarak, Isha Salaat is currently happening at 7:30 p.m. So let's assume that 7:30 p.m. was the time of Isha Salaat more than 1400 years ago, around the same time of the year. Night begins nowadays at 6:56 p.m. and it ends at 5:47 a.m. just before Fajr time. A little before Fajr time, actually. In other words, we're looking at close to 11 hours and then some minutes or so of night. In the books of Ahadith, we find this narration that Holy Prophet ﷺ would spend, he would sleep right after Isha and then he would wake up just around the midnight. If I was to take the exact time when the night falls here and the exact time when the night ends here, the middle of it is the midnight mark. And that would be 12 a.m. and 21 minutes. So 12:21 a.m. Now, from the Quran and Ahadith, we find that Holy Prophet ﷺ would wake up either just before or right after the midnight mark. And from here begins the journey of his single day of Tahajjud prayer. And that's all that I will be able to share today. He would wake up, and the very first thing that he would do is he would recite the prayer of waking up, and then he would take his hands and he would rub his hands on his face so that he's fully up, fully awake. After which he would recite, while he is sitting on his bed, he would recite the last 10 verses of Surah Al-Imran. After this, our beloved Master, Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would get up. He would find a small mashkiza, a small bag which contained water. And then he would perform wuzu. He would perform his ablution thoroughly. He would take his time to perform the wuzu appropriately and as properly as possible. And then he would begin offering his tahajjud salat. The way he would offer his tahajjud salat is that he would offer 8 nawafil in the sets of 2s, so 4 sets of 2 rakat each. And then he would end it with 3 rakat of witr salat. We'll come to witr salat in a bit. The way Holy Prophet ﷺ would start his tahajjud prayer would be, and the hadith, in the books of hadith it is mentioned, that Holy Prophet ﷺ would start off with light prayers. So the very first 2 rakat were not very heavy, were not very long. This is for other individuals. For other individuals, he would say that you should start off easy. He said, إِذَا أَحَدُكُم مِّنَ اللَّيْلِ فَلْيَفْتَتِحْ صَلَاتَهُ بِرَكْعَتَيْنِ. When any one of you begins reading his tahajjud prayer or her tahajjud salat, do it by offering 2 nawafil that are easy, meaning that are not too long. Promised Messiah ﷺ used to take this hadith and he used to act on it. And the first 2 rakat, that the way Promised Messiah ﷺ would offer the tahajjud prayer would be that in the first rakat he would recite Ayat al-Kursi after Surah Fatiha. And then in the second rakat after Surah Al-Fatiha he would recite Surah Al-Ikhlas. This way a person gets into the mental mode and physical mode of being completely focused in prayer. Let's quickly switch back to the tahajjud of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The very first 2 nawafil, the way he would offer them, according to Hazrat Huzaifa radiallahu anhu, who actually physically prayed with the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day. And what I'm presenting now is basically his testimony of what he observed. He said, in the very first rak'ah, the Holy Prophet ﷺ after Surah Al-Fatiha would slowly, beautifully, as Quran explained, and thoughtfully recite the first half of Surah Al-Baqarah. This is just the first rak'ah. Now, whatever the time it would take for him to recite this much would be the same amount of time he would spend in his ruku. Then, after his ruku, he would say, Sami Allahu liman hamida. And then, as long was his ruku, his qiyam now was also as long. And after this, he would then perform his first sajda. And his first sajda was as long as was his qiyam. And then he would say Allahu Akbar, and he would then sit between the two sajdas. This is called jilsa. In this jilsa, he would spend the same amount of time roughly as he just spent in his sajda. He would say Allahu Akbar and then go back in the second sajda. And now he will spend the same amount of time as he spent in jilsa. This was just the first rak'ah. He would say Allahu Akbar and then he would stand up again. And now he will offer the second rak'ah. And the way he would offer second rak'ah is that after Surah Al-Fatiha, he would finish the remaining portion of Surah Al-Baqarah. For those of you who are still wondering how many verses are there in Surah Al-Baqarah, to be precise, that's 287 verses. 40 rukus. 40 rukus. And this is just the second rak'ah by now. After performing his second rak'ah, after reciting the remaining portion of Surah Al-Baqarah, Holy Prophet ﷺ would then say Allahu Akbar and go in ruku. Again spending the same amount of time in ruku now as he just spent in his qiyam while reciting Surah Al-Baqarah. Then he would go back from ruku into qiyam, spending the same amount of time as his ruku. Then in sajda, then in jalsa, then in sajda, and then his qawma. Qada. This is how he would perform his first two rak'ahs. The next two set of rak'ahs would be slightly shorter, still longer, but slightly shorter than the first two. And here is what he would recite in the second set of his rak'ahs. After Surah Al-Fatiha, he would recite a big chunk, close to maybe half of Surah Ali Imran. Then he would say Allahu Akbar and go in ruku, just like the first two rak'ah. He would spend the same amount of time in ruku as he just spent in his qiyam. Then from ruku he would go back into qiyam and spend the same amount of time. Then sajda, then jilsa, then sajda. Again at each step, spending the same amount of time. Then he would say Allahu Akbar and stand up again. And then he would offer the second rak'ah, in which after Surah Fatiha he would finish the remaining portion of Surah Al-Imran. Those of us who are wondering how many ayat and how many rukus that is, that's 201 verses, equaling a total of 20 rukus this time. Then he would go in ruku, spending the same amount of time as his qiyam. Then from ruku back to qiyam, from qiyam to sajda, then jilsa, then back to sajda, and then qada, spending the same amount of time at each step. This is how he would spend his time. By now he has just offered first 4 nawafil. His third set of rakats would be that after Surah Al-Fatiha, he would recite around half of Surah An-Nisa. About half of Surah An-Nisa. And then following the same pattern, same amount of time would be spent in his ruku, then qiyam, then sajda, and all the other parts of his salah. And in the second rak'ah, he would then finish after Surah Fatiha. He would finish Surah Surah An-Nisa. Again, spending the same amount of time as his ruku, qiyam, sajda, so on and so forth. And the last two rakat of his tahajjud, he would recite after Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah Al-Ma'idah. The first half of Surah Al-Ma'idah in the first rakah, again spending the same amount of time in his ruku, then qiyam, then sajda, then jilsa, then sajda, and then back for the second rakah. This time finishing the remainder of Surah Al-Ma'idah. In another hadith it is mentioned that it is probably Surah Al-Anfal. So it's either of the two. But let's go with the first narration that says Surah Al-Ma'idah. By now, Holy Prophet ﷺ has spent around 4 hours, more than 4 hours, of his time in remembrance of his God. Surah Al-Imran had 201 verses, total of 20 rukus. Surah An-Nisa has 177 verses, a total of 24 rukus. Surah Al-Ma'idah has a total of 121 verses, totaling 16 rukus. When you put all these rukus together, you get 100 rukus. 100 rukus in a single night in Tahajjud Salah. And the total number of verses, I calculated it before coming here today. It's 786. 786 was the number of the total number of verses that he would recite in a single night in his Tahajjud Salah. After this, he would offer his witr salat. And the way he would offer his witr salat is that he would break it into two. First, he would offer 2 rakat. Then he would say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And then he would stand up and then offer the 3rd rakat. And the way he would offer his witr is that in the first rakah he would offer, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would offer Surah Al-Ala after the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. In the second rakah he would offer Surah Al-Kafir. And in the 3rd rakah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would offer Surah Al-Ikhlas. After this, after having offered his witr salat, Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go back to his bed and then sleep on his right hand. And when he would hear the muazzin call the azan for Fajr Salat, he would wake up again, he would perform wuzu, or he would take a quick shower, and then he would proceed to the Masjid for Salah. In the ahadith we find that Holy Prophet ﷺ would offer his sunnah prayers at home, and then he would go to Masjid. So most likely he would have offered his sunnah prayers for the Fajr Salat at home, and then he proceeded to the Masjid for the Fajr prayer. What a long, beautiful night. This is why Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, when somebody asked her, what was the life of Holy Prophet ﷺ like? Her response was, have you not read the Quran? Kana khuluquhu bil Quran. Because if you read Quran, you would know that his morals, his days, his nights were exactly in accordance with what the Quran says. And this is why I started my speech with the recitation from the Quran, from Surah Al-Muzammil. In his later years of night, before we talk about the next point I want to mention, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha has been quoted that Holy Prophet ﷺ, when he would read such lengthy prayers, such lengthy tahajjud, night after night after night after night, months after months, years after years, she would say to Holy Prophet ﷺ that قَدْ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكَ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ, that Allah the Almighty has forgiven your shortcomings, your inclinations, if there be any, Allah has forgiven any wrong inclinations of yours from the past and from the future. Why do you go so hard on yourself? And the reason she would say this is because she would see her husband night after night in that agonizing pain. The narrators of Ahadith mention that Holy Prophet ﷺ, when he would pray this long, his feet would become swollen and then his heels would crack. Imagine the pain. Imagine the pain. And now look at the response that Holy Prophet gave to his wife. He said, what you're saying is true. But does that not mean that afala akunu abdan shakura? Does this not mean that I now should become a grateful servant of my Lord? This was him thanking his Allah every night. And this is just the night. Towards the last segment of Holy Prophet ﷺ's life, when he became very old, his tahajjud was still very long. And it is mentioned in the books of Ahadith that now when he was extremely old, towards the end of his life, Holy Prophet ﷺ would still offer tahajjud salat. Most likely the same way, but this time around sitting. So he would recite most of the verses in each rak'ah while sitting. And when 30-40 verses would remain, then he would stand up and then finish his recital. And then he would go into ruku, then qiyam, then sajda, until he comes back up for the second rak'ah. And then he would sit again. And then he would, while sitting, recite again for a very long time from the Quran. And then when few verses were left, around 30-40 verses, again he would then stand up and then finish reciting the portion of the Quran while standing. And then he would go into ruku, then qiyam, then sajda. My dear brothers and sisters, what I have shared here with you are barely 5 hours of the life in a day of Holy Prophet ﷺ. May Allah Ta'ala allow me and all of you and our family members to become true worshippers of Allah Ta'ala. May we become true servants of Allah Ta'ala. May we become true lovers of Holy Prophet ﷺ. Because, believe me when I say this, all blessings lie in following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah the Almighty forgive our shortcomings and accept our humble efforts. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin.